Well, hi everybody. As you just heard, my name is Chris Bond. I'm from the Wire magazine. To my left, we have Stuart SWEZEY, the director and the producer of the film, and the man who ran the think.
Hey, thank you.
And then we have Jack here, who's a writer, filmmaker, and somebody who is also a consultant on this film. And at the far end, we have Mark Stewart, who is Mark Stewart, formerly of the pop group, and
That's for the video.
yeah. Yeah, well, as you've all seen this film, all the questions that we'd like to ask were asked in the film and answered in the film. So this is going to be a Q&A where I'm going to play tough cop. Jack is probably going to play tender cop. Mark will be Mark, and Stuart is going to be the person who has to answer.
I get the third degree, basically.
Yeah, Mark Stuart gets a third degree, absolutely. Well, I mean, we start off really by saying the whole idea of this film was you're taking people to places they've never been before, and in that process transplanting them into headspaces they wouldn't normally get to. And yeah, it seems like it was a big success in doing so. But what was the motivation for
The motivation of doing these events in the first place?
Exactly, yeah.
So, I mean, for me, it was like the music that I was listening to at that time and the scene that we were involved in felt like nightclubs and like beer stained, just places on the Sunset Strip or whatever. It just didn't seem like the right venue. So the idea of going out to the desert seemed to be more in keeping with kind of this bigger vision of the sound of the music. And some of it was very specific, like Savage Republic had kind of this Middle Eastern spaghetti Western vibe, and some of it was more just conceptually getting away from the basic rock and roll kind of venues.
Yeah, well, I think that Savage Republic were a very important part of this, I think, in the way that the very name Savage Republic seems to establish the idea of a temporary autonomous zone.
Hey.
And this is
Akin Bay.
Yeah, Akin Bay, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And this seemed to be part of the whole thing, multicultural setup, and then going on and finding a place to do this away from any public spaces, so where you could continue unhindered.
Yeah, I mean, it was a combination of trying to. I think being here in London for me, it's like we were a little bit intimidated by other cities like New York and London that had, even San Francisco, that had their scenes, and we always felt like we had something to prove. I think being in LA, and so the desert was something that we had that I didn't think anyone else could, take a bunch of people from the center of the city and just drive them out to the desert and have this amazing music. So that was for me a big part of it, and then another part of it I think was just police repression. I mean, it was actually a moment where it was really hard to do live music that was punk rock, or even that they even thought was punk rock. I mean, we might have called it post-punk or whatever.
New Romantic.
Or in some cases, new romantic. But some were closer to new romantic than others. There was definitely a few bands I could think of. But
Chris Bond.
I'm hippie.
You are now, but back then you were really new romantic.
Was I?
Anyway,
Was I?
modern English. Sorry, Stu.
there you go.
I'm completely confused.
No, just melt with him. Go with
Melt
it.
yeah, I'll go with it. Yeah. Yeah. But okay, so but the whole what was great about the opening of the film, you're talking to people, every different kind of people here, and talking about the multiculturalism of it. But again, playing tough cop, all the bands who were playing were mainly white, and there's only one woman, I think, in the whole thing. So how did you resolve? How did you resolve the nature of it being multicultural and approaching that, but having this very, very white music?
I think that's a really valid point.
Can I just butt in there?
Yep.
Sorry, Chris.
No, it's fine, Mark. Carry on.
From the minute go, they were saying about how mixed race is like in Bristol, how mixed race the LA shows were. They were like those guys. I mean, they were doing like this. It's a later period to what I remember as punk, but in New Romantic LA, they were doing like ska dancing, and there was like some black guy with really bad dreadlocks. Like there was. If you look at that footage that Stuart's got, it was a very mixed scene.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
Oh, on stage. Sorry.
Right.
sorry.
I mean, the thing is that I didn't program the events according to trying to be multicultural.
No,
I think there were bands like we were talking about the Zeros from San Diego. They were all Latino, Chicano, guys. They were earlier even than this phase, but for me it was more about a certain sound, and so I just thought it was important to emphasize who was there, who was part of it. The people that were helping me organize the shows. So I feel like there's a lot of people involved in a music scene that aren't necessarily up on stage, and they're not necessarily the people playing the instruments. And so there was a lot of women involved, and I've had, screenings where people have said to me afterward, like, wow, thank you for making a rock documentary that has women in it, and I don't know, I guess in a perfect world, everything would be segmented, so that everybody would be represented. But that wasn't really how we were approaching it creatively. So
Understood. Jack Sargent, as a tender cop, would you have like to contribute to?
I'm interested in what you were saying about the desert, because when you started making the film, we were talking a lot about the desert. I was interested in what you were saying about the desert and the way the desert plays into everything. Because when I first met Stuart and I found out that he'd put on these gigs, I was like blown away, because you had that first Sonic Youth record that came out over here, the Death Valley 69, with a photo of them playing in the desert. And that seemed so seductive to me. So watching the film again, I'm just always amazed by how seductive the desert is, and there's this backdrop for the scene. And this idea that you've got these people from like this kind of rundown, right-wing dominated city where they can't do gigs, and you've just driven these kids out to the middle of nowhere, which I just think is an amazing kind of cultural experience for people.
yeah, I mean, and part of it is that the desert is an amazing setting for whatever you're going to do. I mean, it really does start to feel like you're on another planet. But I don't think, I mean, part of it was taking people like Sonic Youth or Einstürzen of Neubauten that were very urban, and then putting this music into this completely other setting. And especially with Neubauten, for me, it was like there was something really primal about their music, and very sort of almost, tribal, even though they were...
Stuart,
Yeah.
what's the name of the girl that I really liked in the film, that female performance artist?
Johanna Wendt.
Yeah. Amazing shit. Like Lizzie Mercier de Clau. I mean, I'm not being a revisionist or anything, or going back to the, but I had the same argument with Simon Reynolds in one of these crackerjack debates in Berlin, when he was saying that Ari was the first female Boadicea of the... But if you look back in history, it's like Bessie Smith or something. They seem to be taking the 1970s, Gina from the Raincoats, they seem to be taking like this DIY... When I first came to London, I was like hanging out with these spare rib sort of feminist wolves, and there were lots and lots of... What was the name of that woman again? Her music
Johanna
was
Wendt. But I want to know more about a spare rib feminist wolf.
Spare Rib was a British feminist magazine.
Oh, okay.
And as soon as the music journalists get hold of them, they write all the...
Exactly.
Give this woman a microphone,
No,
please.
no, my boss is here.
But it's not even to do with women. It's to do with all sorts. Because I was saying to them, Solar, the sound of Los Angeles, was this amazing electro, cutting-edge experimental label. The 12 inches was amazing. I've been arguing with The Wire since time immemorial that there was much better stuff happening in LA than their stuff on the black scene, on Solar. But anyway.
It's basically about who gets to write the story is who writes the history.
Right.
They get to say who's in
For me, it's important, I guess, just that...
Her story. That's what she said.
But,
Wasn't it?
but people tell their own stories,
Exactly.
I think it is important. I mean, for me, it was like, if I didn't do this, I didn't know who was going to piece this all together. So for me, it was like I had the experience of working in television. I'd produced another music documentary, Better Living Through Circuitry. And so I just felt like this is going to be lost to the ages if I don't do it. So.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think what was very interesting was that the guy at the end, the Vice writer, he said something. I never thought I'd agree with the Vice writer, but here he was. He's saying this
Former
idea,
Vice writer.
Former Vice writer. Okay, fine. But I thought his statement was perfect when he was saying the thing about it's better to fade away. Maybe burn out would be better than to fade away, but to fade away rather than to go on to
Neil
go
Young
on to become the Burning Man or the Coachella thing.
I don't know if it was a conscious decision for me. It was more just like I felt like I did these 3 shows that were out in the desert and one with the Minutemen in San Pedro, and I had no big ambition to continue to be a promoter at that point in time. So, this is a guy who's in his mid-20s looking at it and going like, wow, now I see the historical significance of it. It was really through talking to Joey that I found out that I had an influence on Burning Man. I actually didn't know that, but Joey lives in Oakland, or now lives in LA. Lived in Oakland at the time, and he was like, "If I want to get this in Vice, I have to have something bigger to tell here." And he said, "Can you hook it into Burning Man in some way?" So I said, "Well, talk to John Law. He's in Oakland. He's been doing all these crazy, sort of the San Francisco Cacophony Society, these sort of situationist happening things, and he might be able to tell you something." And then that's where that all kind of came together. So now John Law and I are much closer. I mean, I knew him, but so I don't know. I think sometimes you just do things spontaneously, and you're not trying to create a career out of it. And I think that's hopefully what comes across. That I was done with that phase of my life and ready to do something else.
And that's what I really, sorry to butt in, but I've come a long way. That's what I really found from this film, is the sense of community. Like when we used to put on things with Bristol and Massive Attack, this sense of community, 50, 100, 1,000 people. But what they did in LA, taking everybody out on buses, Four Del Bow did it later on, people belong in this situation. And that couple said they're going to remember it for the rest of their lives. And you're a maker that made these, talking about situations, you made these situations where people could, I was talking about something, they could create themselves in these places, like that guy who wrote the letter back to his mum saying, the reason I left home was to become this person. And it's only because Stuart or Chris with the Y, or this guy, I've forgotten his name, the guy with the beard,
Jack.
through his music, through his writing for Amok, if you're an artist, which I find quite distasteful, you create these zones.
Agreed.
Which Spandau Ballet did up the road when Robert Elms was reading his poetry, where you can find yourself. It's been happening in Soho and these sort of theatres for quite a long time.
Yeah,
that goes back to your question about the ethnicity of the performers. And in a way, it's like this whole idea that everyone's there and inventing themselves. So there's some sense that those barriers didn't exist because people are coming together.
Well, I think it's also what Alex Hacker and Blixer were saying from Manchester to Neubaut, and this idea where the audience is facing the audience is creating the performance.
Blixer was saying you get the energy from,
That's right, and then so people create themselves through that, and that's what happens with these smaller events.
The artists do as well.
Exactly, that's right, yeah. And I think this is what happens when it's before it becomes a big branded event. So you can go back, you take this idea of the temporary autonomous zones, go back to the free festivals in the 60s, late 60s, like Glastonbury Festival. Or
Allen Ginsberg's thing at the
Hall.
Allen Ginsberg's thing at the...
Allen Ginsberg, that's right. All these particular moments in time which create this, but then later on they become something else. And one cannot forget that it's rooted in this very early stage when there'll be a couple of hundred people, memories of a free festival, David Bowie song and things like this. These are all having... they had the moment happens very early on, and later on it becomes much more... of a branded thing. Sorry to lose you, Mark. Sorry to bore you, Mark. Yeah.
Hey, I was just going to say, one thing I think some people forgot here, is what you see in that film, which I think is also as important as the gigs, is a lot of those people, it's the first time they've ever been to the desert.
Right.
It's like, I grew up in East LA, or I grew up somewhere else, and I've never been to the desert. This whole thing is new. And that's something I think was lost in this conversation.
Well, part of that for me is like, I'm in Britain, you know what I mean? Like, you guys don't have a desert, or it's a long way to Morocco or whatever. So, but
Birmingham.
I lived in Birmingham, I agree.
So, but my point is that it's
I was born in Birmingham.
It's not really about the desert. I mean, it is, but it's also about like, how can you take a situation wherever you are and make it into... San Pedro worked as well, you know what I mean? Getting people on a boat and going around the harbor. So I feel like, but there is something super cool. Like, you put almost anything in the desert and it's going to look pretty good. And I do think that, there was like millions of people in LA, and why didn't none of us go out there and experience it? Yeah.
One thing that doesn't come across in the film is the heat. Tell us about the heat, please. The desert.
Well, I planned it so that it would be either spring or fall. Like none of those shows were in the middle of the summer because that's when it gets really hot. And the thing about actually it was the cold that was the issue. January in the desert. By the time the night, the sun went down. It was actually really hard for people to even play their instruments. And I remember there's some part of the video where I think it's Jeff McDonald says from Red Cross says like the cold is making my fingers do funny things, so it gets hot in the desert, and I knew that. Yeah. So I didn't really want to subject people to that.
Right. Well, we should open up. But the one
I
thing
think Jack wants to sing.
we should open up to the audience. If anybody has questions of Stuart or Mark or Jack, please. So there's a man right at the back. Yeah.
What kind of state was the archive footage in from the gigs? Because did it need remastering or what have you?
Yeah. So the footage was in various forms, but I didn't have any of it when I started on the project. I knew certain people, like I'd given them permission to shoot, and then I had to track them down and find the footage. Some of it I only saw on YouTube. I mean, in a sense, like Sonic Youth footage was shot by Flipside, which was a zine back, but I didn't really understand that this stuff was getting documented in a sense. And the worst situation was there's a filmmaker who shot really some of the best footage of Einstürzen Neubauten and then SRL and all that, Gary Walco, who he had a 12-minute sort of short film that he made, but the rest of the footage was on 3/4-inch videotapes that were in a warehouse in Rancho Cucamonga, which is like an hour and a half east of LA, out in what's called the Inland Empire. And so he told me about it. He said, "Go out there, get the footage from this guy." And apparently he was about to shut his factory down, throw out all the footage, and move to South Carolina. So that was like a lucky break. But yeah, I mean, it's just a variety of different situations. But it was either 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch. All had to get digitized, and then the audio was another whole aspect of it because a lot of times the audio wasn't that good. So thankfully, there's a person who recorded everything on his Sony Walkman, and we were able to kind of put it all together.
Is that specific enough for you?
So, other questions, please, from the audience? Well, any other questions? Okay. One thing I wanted to say about the music, so a lot of the music people I really liked a lot, Savage Republic, Neubauten, Sonic Youth, and everyone. But the first thing is the first time I've ever gotten the Minutemen is through seeing this film. It's tremendous to see D. Boone and the way Mike Watt was talking about it. It's such an incredible band, and I never really got it until now to seeing this film.
Sorry, I've come a long way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mike Watts, after God knows how old I am now, but going back to coming up here in 1976 or something, Mike Watts is the spine. Him and the guy from Fugazi, Ian What's-His-Face, are the spine of the American underground. And Mike drives around in that van, doesn't he?
Totally, yeah.
And if it wasn't for just watching his film, and then there's all these sort of musicians or whatever, posers to a certain extent, like we all were. Suddenly the Minutemen walk on, Daniel and Mike and the other guy, and they're like farmers, which I find really homely. But those guys keep it together, didn't they? I mean, Mike is crucial to the American music story, I find. Mike Watts, right?
Yeah, I agree.
No, I can't. I mean, and also just in terms of staying inspired over decades and decades, still doing new work. That's really great. I mean, he's an amazing person. And when Iggy needed a new bass player, he came to Mike Watt.
Mike and the guy from Dinosaur Jr. got the Stooges to reform.
Right. That is.
So could you tell us also what's happened to people like Savage Republic, Bruce Leitch? Is he still running his independent project press? Or?
Bruce lives in a small town in California called Bishop, which is sort of near the mountains, but also near Death Valley. And he has that letterpress that we saw in the film, and he still does really, really cool work. He designed stuff that we have here in the lobby, and so he's still doing music. He's still doing the letterpress, and he also has a label. I mean, he's just really, keeping it going.
Could I just say something really quickly, Chris?
Yep.
Tomorrow night at what I think is the best independent venue in London, the Horse Hospital, Stuart and Jack are doing. Can you explain what you're doing about? Because
I'm gonna throw
this
that to
guy,
Jack. He set it up.
apart from Desolation Centre, he's had 2 bows in his arrow. He set up the most amazing distribution publishing house in the world, Amot Press in the States. Respect on that, Stuart. Jack, tell them what it's
Thanks, man.
about.
Yeah, tell us what we're doing.
That's like an advert for something else. We're talking about Amok and the underground publishing and going through the whole history of all this stuff tomorrow at the Horse Hospital at 7:00.
Good.
But I want
Showing
to
some fucked up clips.
I just want to go back to.
Do you want to ask something?
You've got merch with you, right? You've got merch.
I've got the mic.
All right.
Okay.
That's made by Bruce.
Right. No, we have some really, really cool printed things that are Desolation Center commemorative, like art cards, and we have the tickets from the. He reproduced all the tickets that he did for the original Desert shows. So anyway, we have them here. We'll be Jack and I at
Just
least will
in
be-
terms of like what's going on, he's still producing stuff, and you
Right.
brought
Well,
some
actually,
over.
we obviously we reconnected for the film, but then when we started our crowdfunding phase, Bruce started designing new work inspired by that. And yeah.
There's a question.
Yeah, can I just ask, is that connected with the Savage Republic book I've heard is coming out? Has that come out yet?
Okay, my understanding from following Bruce's posts and stuff. I mean, I ordered a copy too, so I'm waiting.
I'm
but
allowed to.
I think it's like going off to the printers soon, and so there's some elements that are being printed in Hong Kong, and some elements that he's doing on the letterpress. But it should be amazing because it's like his entire,
Yeah. Well, when I heard
body
about
of
the
work.
film, Savage Republic was the first band I thought of because of from LA and their whole sound and the desert. So yeah, it was great to see all that footage.
Cool. Thank you.
I just wanted to plug the book, the Savage Republic book again, and also Savage Republic are going to be going on tour in Europe next year.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for Savage Republic, but a lot of the people that, I mean, none of the original people that were in the shots that we showed that played on, in the Desert show that I put on are in Savage Republic. But they're still carrying on. I mean, they've been going on for decades, and, I don't know whether they're coming here or not, but they were all people that were kind of part of our scene. And some of the people that you actually see in Gemma Elfnaab pounding on, percussion up on the cliff are now the members of Savage Republic. So like,
Well, that's what's so great is all the people in this film are still doing stuff, and even the audience, like Ron Athey and people like that. These are all people who, as Ron says, they went through this experience to create stuff. And all the bands are still playing in various forms. That sense that something was happening. It's like the future was there. Just
For
going
me,
forward.
Jack, Ron Athey has taken that spirit into totally. He's the most important artist of our generation. Can you explain something about Ron Athey to these people, please?
You all know Ron Athey, right? The performance artist who he was the guy who's sitting there with tattoos on his neck and stuff, and he does a lot of performance art where he involved in kind of body performance art around representations of the body and sexuality and so on. He just did a big show that's toured through Britain based on George Bataille, which I haven't seen because he's literally only just finished touring it. So he's an artist who engages with this kind of experience of the body and so on, and he did a lot of performances that involved bleeding and stuff like that as well, and piercing his flesh and putting his skin back and so on. It's quite beautiful work, very evocative and powerful work, and politically really engaged as well, I think.
I think that's where this, there's a couple of artists in your film, Stuart, that have really taken this thing to another level, and Ron is like constantly challenging, borders and areas that we used to do when we were kids as music, but it's like Banksy in Bristol. So for me, Ron Athey is carrying that spirit lock, stock and barrel.
yeah, I mean, and for me to hear him say that, being at one of those shows
Exactly.
was transformative kind of blew me away. I didn't expect him to say that, so that's why I wanted that to be part of the film.
You created that space for these people to dream into,
Yeah.
respect.
Thank you.
I seconded.
I third it.
Thirded.
More respect to Jack, though. He's got the beard.
But there's one thing I wanted to return maybe briefly to the idea of the temporary autonomous zone and bring it over to the UK, where there's an organisation called, you probably remember them, Mark, Final Solution?
Yes.
Yeah, and they put on events in various odd places as well as presenting the pop group and various other people.
They put it on Throbbing Gristle at the Scala,
Throbbing
right?
Gristle and Scala and a certain ratio and all these bands.
That's what I was talking to him about, Monty Kazaza. Sorry,
Monty
Chris.
Kazaza, yeah. No, so I wanted to ask, if you don't mind, Stuart, if you're asking Mark about this experience of what was happening in the UK and maybe a
Well,
similar
basically,
thing.
when I first met Stuart, just to go off on some Jeremy Beadle sort of aside, not with a shriveled hand though. I was just up the road behind Tottenham Court Road, and Monty Kazaza, who I didn't realise was part of Mark Pauline's thing, who I love, Leather Nun, and somebody else was doing something in a little cinema like this up the road in like '79 or something, and they were showing our pop group films, which has just come out on the Y reissue. I've been forced to say that by the powers that be, Netflix, Mute Records. Anyway. And suddenly Ian Curtis just sort of leant over and tapped me on the shoulder. And it was like your things, Final Solution, set up these events with like us, Cabaret Voltaire, Throbbing Gristle, Monty Kazaza, Boyd Rice, who for me, again, like Ron Athy, however you pronounce it, is a complete and utter legend of our scene. You know, becoming head of Church of Satan is like beyond believable. Do you know what I mean? And so suddenly you're like, you know, they were, you know, and then and like I said to Chris, every time I see you, last time I saw, you know, that final solution had something to do with the William Burroughs thing at the Brixton Ritzy, right?
I'm not sure about that.
Anyway, yeah. But they created these weird
Final
events,
Academy,
which I keep on saying. I was just talking to Stuart in the bar, and at the moment, everybody is kind of competing against each other. And for example, if Savage Republic were coming to England, they should tour with like Shame or a cool English band. People don't talk, you know, people should create scenes again like you did, Stu.
To talk about Boyd Rice, talking about ethnicities beforehand. We've now got issues with Boyd Rice, and I don't know the facts in and out of the social Darwinism that he espouses, and him.
He's
and
a provocateur like Kenneth Thank. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that.
Well,
He's in the film.
I mean, I'll just comment.
We have to close any minute, so if we close with a comment from
Can
Stuart.
we just say something?
Stuart can finish this.
Before we've got to close, but we will talk outside because I don't want it to close on that question. Because I want that question to be answered. So if we don't finish it here, we'll finish it outside.
Why don't you just answer it now then?
Well, Stuart's about to.
Well, it was important to me to show the Boyd of that time and to get Vale to comment on it, and because they were very close. And I do think he, you know, when Vale says that he was one of the most creative people I ever met in my life, or however he puts it, that's the Boyd that I knew at that time, and I certainly obviously met him again and interviewed him, and I think there's a lot going on, and it's a larger discussion. But I do think he was an amazingly innovative person.
Back then, at the time, he was a very charming and a very funny prankster, man back in the early 80s.
I think he still is, like Kenneth Anger. People push the things. It's a provocation.
But I'm
extremely
afraid,
dangerous.
Yeah.
But these are dangerous times.
These are dangerous times, but this is also time to end, I'm afraid. So thanks to Mark Stewart,
And
Jack
thank
Sargent,
you, Chris and Mark
Stuart
and Jack
Swayze.
for doing this with me.
And-
It's an honor. Yeah.
And if people want to continue the conversation outside in the bar,
So first we'll be at the merch table, which is also the dock and roll table, and then we'll be hanging out afterward as well. So, yeah, if you didn't get to ask your question or you just want to talk to us, we'll be around.
yeah, thank you.